Hi, good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today and spending your afternoon with us. My name is Nadine Vernon. I'm the Vice President at Cision Insights UK, and I'll be taking you through today's program. We're pleased to bring you COVID-19 comms best practices, a webinar aimed to provide communications advice in times of uncertainty. With the pandemic dominating the global media agenda and affecting businesses, it's a difficult and strange period for brand comms. We have a fantastic panel of experts with us today to answer all of your crisis comms questions and provide tips on how to become a trusted source of information for your industry. A few housekeeping points before we kick off. We're live tweeting using the hashtag COVID-19 comms. Do keep an eye on the Cision UK Twitter handle and please get involved in the conversation throughout. We'd love to hear from you. On24 is the platform used to broadcast this webinar. You don't need to worry about muting your line or hearing any background noises from other participants. And if you look around the On24 suite, there are a host of different features to utilize during the webinar. The most important one that I'd like to highlight is the Q&A widget on the left-hand side. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to ask them in the side panel, and we'll answer as many as we can during the Q&A at the end. The slides and the recording will also be available on demand after the live webinar. So let me take you through today's agenda. What we'd like to start with is an analysis of the current media landscape surrounding COVID-19, followed by tips on how brands should communicate during a crisis, including crafting a response, and finally answers to your questions on handling the COVID-19 crisis. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our speakers for today. We're joined by two great industry professionals. We have Angelica Malin with us, Editor-in-Chief at About Time magazine, and Phil Hall, Founder and Chairman at the PHA Group. Listed for BSME Editor's Editor of the Year 2019, Angelica is the founder and editor-in-chief of About Time magazine, one of the UK's leading lifestyle magazines, with a readership of 85,000 people in 215 countries every month. An ambitious young entrepreneur, Angelica also hosts the She Started It podcast and Festival of Female Empowerment in the UK. Phil specializes in crisis management and spends much of his time protecting the reputations of clients and individuals. He rose to be the editor of Britain's best-selling newspaper for 5 years before taking up the reins as editor-in-chief of the world's most best-known celebrity magazine. He later became editorial director of development for Trinity Mirror, Europe's largest newspaper publishing group. Phil has recently been named in the top 10 crisis management advisors in the PR Week Power Book and Spear's 500 top crisis management experts. Thank you so much for joining us both today. I'd like to begin by handing it over to Phil with the first panel question. Phil, have you seen any changes in the media landscape since the pandemic outbreak? And if so, what are they?
Well, I think there's a number of changes. Number one is newspapers are in danger of making themselves irrelevant from a news point of view because TV is so on the moment and so up to speed with everything that by the time you get the paper the following morning, it's out of date. I was looking at the Times earlier, and the front page is about the stranded Brits, being flown home, which was announced yesterday at 5 o'clock. It's talking about the latest death toll, which again was on TV earlier. So I think newspapers are struggling to make themselves more relevant. That's certainly one of the changes. I think television, it's interesting actually. We're seeing TV obviously hooking the nation because it's bringing us up to speed with everything. But I don't know about you and people listening in here. I find it can be overkill really. In the end, you're in danger of becoming very down and very depressed, watching hour after hour after hour of bad news. And certainly they've got to start to look. I think start trying to get some hopeful news out. When you look at Boris Johnson or President Trump, like him or not, they try to deliver some positive news whenever they're holding a broadcast, because I think people need some hope to cling on to. So I think that's one of the areas that I think we're seeing TV is dominating the agenda. And finally, my area, PR agencies, I think we're going to see so many go to the wall. It's a very difficult time for them because PR agencies are like many small and medium-sized businesses, are cash flow businesses, and you get paid a fee to deliver a service. And if that cash flow stops, then you have a real problem. And I think the very small agencies will survive because they are able to mothball their businesses for a short period of time without too much cost. the very big agencies have deep pockets to survive, but the ones in the middle are going to find it very difficult because, as I said, they have cash flow issues. You can furlough staff, which is something nobody wants to do, which means that effectively being paid by government. But then afterwards, you've got to get your business back up and running very quickly to better make all ends meet. So we're seeing some dramatic changes in the media, but we're a long way to go yet, I think.
Thanks for that, Phil. And I think certainly as consumers, it's really important for us, as you say, to see some different stories being reported on out there as well. Angelica, would you say then that journalists are actually interested in anything other than coronavirus currently? And are non-coronavirus stories still important?
Yeah, I definitely think that we want to cover things that aren't directly the virus. Of course, I think it's important to pay homage to what's going on and to talk about the issue, but I actually think we want to be covering things that are different for our audience. I know from my personal experience, our audience want to read things that are positive, uplifting, useful, informative. They want things that are inspiring. They don't necessarily want to read news 24/7. So actually we, as lifestyle titles, also play an important role of providing a bit of escapism for our audience. So I think if you're working for a PR agency and you're concerned that your pictures are not going to land, actually we're really desperate for stories that aren't just about the virus and can help our audience in different ways. So there is still an important role there.
Excellent.
I think that's very true. If I can just say, I think that's absolutely right. And I think that's why Angelica and other websites are so important, because they are offering people hope and positivity. But I think also newspapers, for PRs looking to get stuff away now, you've really got to look at some of the sections of the paper rather than the news section, because the news section will be dominated by coronavirus. But there are feature sections still, sports sections, thought sections, comment sections, and those are going to be the areas that we've really got to target.
Yeah. I would say a lot of us are doing a brand pivot, and if you want to try and land pictures, you have to really thoroughly be reading the publications now, because we're changing our content strategy a lot, and there's going to be new opportunities, and we're going to get rid of a lot of the old content that we were running previously. So paying attention to those pivots and where you can fit into that.
Okay, excellent. And you talked a little bit earlier, Phil, about political figures. I think German comms professionals, they've really commended Chancellor Merkel's handling of the coronavirus pandemic and portrayed it as direct, vivid and emotional crisis comms. But then we've seen the flip side of the coin, where President Trump called it a Chinese virus and then sort of tried to appease it with a supporting message to the American Chinese population the next day. How would you say political figures' speeches impact brand crisis comms plans, Phil?
It's a very difficult question, because President Trump is currently enjoying the highest ratings of his presidency. So I think it's baffling to some of us. So I think you've got to understand that brands and nations are very different. I think we would be offended by that sort of approach if he was leading Great Britain, for instance. But in America, it seems to work. It seems this sort of punchy attitude. I mean, whether he will survive like that, it depends, I guess, on how the death toll rises in America and whether he's seen to blame for not acting quickly enough. But I think Angela Merkel, we advise people constantly on how they face the media. And first thing I always say is you can't be somebody you're not. Trying to be soft and showing humility and gentle when you're a tough, hard-nosed bruiser is not going to work. But certainly she's shown empathy, and I think I think Boris Johnson has. I think Boris Johnson has shown, he's been who he is, which is somebody who's very sort of full of life and energy, and he's getting that across. And I think, he's been very, very careful and clever, really, to say that he's following expert advice all the way along the line. He's not making these decisions on his own. He's got top scientists and medics around him. And I think that's added to his brand, really. It's shown that he's somebody who's prepared to listen. Angela Merkel should be applauded. I don't think Macron's done particularly well in France. But Trump is a really difficult one, because it's a unique situation. I think he is an odd character, and the Americans seem to like that. They like the positivity in him. What I was saying earlier really is, you can be grim and say we're all going to be locked up for the next 9 months. Do people actually want to hear that? No, they want to hear that. By Easter I think we'll have a change. Now that's not going to work out for him, but I think at least he's giving people stuff to cling on. It's cling on to. It's that positivity that's needed right now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Phil. And maybe Angelica, if we sort of look at brands, then there are obviously multiple psychological tangents that are triggered by the pandemic currently that we're seeing circulate in the media. We're looking at a loo roll shortage, panic buying groceries, and stockpiling as well. Would you say brands should try to cover all of these aspects that are portrayed in the media, or really stick to the on-brand ones?
Well, I think the concept of on-brand is quite different now because brands are having to shapeshift a lot around what's happening. I think if you have some kind of unrivaled access to fitting into that story, so if you have interesting statistics or you have insights that another brand or company wouldn't have that genuinely fit with the issues that people are talking about, then go out and promote it and try and get coverage. But I wouldn't try and shoehorn yourself into the narrative unless it actually genuinely fits. So look at the expertise, look at your brand offering and where you can provide something interesting. And that's where the story or the news hook is. I wouldn't just try and force it if it doesn't have a natural kind of a synergy with it.
I think the other thing is that what we haven't seen done particularly well is the use of photographs. Right at the beginning of this crisis, there was a picture of an elderly lady trying to fill a shopping basket at Tesco's, with all the shelves were empty. And I would have, if I were advising Tesco's, who were trying to sort of calm down this mass panic and mass buying, and government indeed, I'd have taken that picture and used it as a poster campaign across the country, because that picture really struck a chord with an awful lot of people. You see somebody who's not as able as others, just being left on the sort of supermarket floor while others are just grabbing everything. And I think that picture could have really calmed people down. So I think use of photographs should not be forgotten. You know, in war situations, photographs can often completely change the course of a war. And I think we've got to really get inside what's happening to people here and understand and illustrate it, because we've been bombarded with millions of words every day, and to a certain extent, you're becoming fatigued with it. You know, photographs and the media using them in the right way and the government using them in the right way could be very effective, in my view.
Okay. Phil, you mentioned earlier how PR agencies are going to be affected, obviously alongside other businesses as well. Are you already seeing an impact on PR budgets?
Yes, inevitably, because clients are struggling, and you only look at the travel companies and the airline companies. They're not going to be spending money promoting their wares at the moment, and I think that's it's a very difficult situation. I mean, we say to people, to our clients, one of the key advice that we give them is to try and show that you're still open for business. You know, when people say we're fighting for survival, people don't want to give you work when you're saying using that sort of words. You've got to show that you're adapting and that you're prepared, you know, very much as we were talking earlier about magazines adapting to different agendas. We've got to explain to our clients they need to adapt to prepare for the comeback. And, giving up and just talking about, we're knee deep in misery is not going to help anybody. There was a fantastic story in the Times at the weekend, a feature about a gentleman who was in Syria, and he ran a bank over there. There was a run on the money in the bank, and all the other banks panicked, and people were charging into these premises, grabbing their accounts, getting all the money out. What his bank did was put lots of money in the windows of the bank, so that everybody could see they weren't running out of it. They were perfectly fine. There was plenty of liquidity there, despite the war, and it calmed the whole situation down. And I think you've got to really understand your clients and work with them. And certainly we understand that some of them are having financial issues. We work with them around that, whether that means taking a payment holiday or whether it means suspending the contract, but they come back in 3 months' time. You've just got to be prepared to adapt. The key is being positive and showing leadership and not retracting and showing that you're, somehow terrified and it's all doom and gloom, because it isn't. The world will change back again.
Yeah, excellent point there. And when we talk about adapting, then obviously during a crisis, especially when it comes to your communication, do you have any tips on any resources or tools that you would suggest?
Yeah, sure, I do. I mean, one of the things, sorry, after you.
No, go ahead.
One of the things I think is very important is, as we're doing now, it's very important to be seen. It's so easy to get cut off from when you're running a business. I have 100 staff. It's very easy to say, well, we send emails to each other. I mean, we've been organising, I know a lot of people have, I'm sure you have, been organising get-togethers online, whether it's a virtual pub or a virtual quiz, just getting people seeing each other and feeling that they're part of an organisation, a family within the business. It's so important that people see. We've been saying to our clients, you've got to communicate more than ever with your own staff. Of course, you're communicating with the outside world, but the most important thing is you're taking your people with you and that they feel that there's a human contact and that you're not being lazy in building those relationships, because that's what's going to get you through, the other side and flourishing again. So I do think that's very important, seeing people. But I think Twitter and Instagram, all the big ones, Facebook, are still very, very important. They're ways of getting instant access out there when some of the news channels are down or full of coronavirus stuff. Certainly we're using some of the social media sites more than we normally would.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Angelica?
Yeah, I think the social media stuff is important. I think when it comes to communicating with your audience during a crisis rather than communicating internally, I think increased visibility and transparency is good. So, for example, with us, we very openly said we're changing our content strategy. We're going to be putting out new stuff. We hope you guys enjoy reading it. And just being honest with your audience that you're making a brand shift. I think that takes people along with the journey, and it shows the humanity of your brand and that there's a softer side of things. And I think that kind of creates more of a community spirit around what you're doing. So if you are able to use Instagram Lives or Facebook videos and kind of get, the people behind your brands talking and explaining how they're experiencing what's going on as well, I think that's a good thing to be doing, to be transparent.
Thank you. I think we're picking up some really good habits actually in this time. Do you think some of these may stick around actually after this pandemic is over?
I really do. I mean, we were quite fortunate in that our agency 3 months ago just set up a remote working philosophy where everybody was given laptops, all properly tuned into each other. The whole office is now very adaptable. So it's been very easy for us just to switch to this remote working. And I think, being honest, as an employer, sometimes you worry about whether your staff, when they're working at home, are going to somehow be doing the washing, going out with a mate to the pub. And actually you find that's not the case at all. You can trust people. You have a good culture in your organisation. Actually, remote working works, and in many ways it's more productive. We do team conferences at 8:30 every morning. We all respect each other. We're all ready, dressed, breakfast done, ready to go. And I think I can see that becoming a way of life, because office space is very expensive in London. It's travelling into London is very expensive, and if people can work at home and still interact and keep those relationships going, I think that will be the new norm. Actually, it's cheaper, more effective, or as effective, and actually people enjoy it.
Excellent. Angelica, you mentioned earlier about communicating in a way that perhaps is a little bit more empathetic. How would you say you strike the balance in tone of voice then between being empathetic and heartfelt, but then at the same time serious and authoritative as well when it comes to a brand's position faced with a global pandemic?
I think there's no tone of voice that will fit everyone. It's a case-by-case basis of what fits your brand best. That said, I think anything that's too light in tone right now doesn't sit very well with journalists. So I've received quite a lot of pitches that have been quite light-hearted and trying to make light or fun of the situation. And I think that try and err on the side of serious when in doubt. But it's what feels authentic to you. And I wouldn't try and change too much from your original brand offering. So if you were always chatty on social media, continue to be chatty on social media. I don't think you have to make a massive change. Is just paying attention to what's going on, and as the news cycle develops, shifting that tone if you need to. But I wouldn't try and travel too far from what your original offering was where possible.
Mm-hmm.
I think we say often to clients as well that we deal with the CEO at a particular place, but he or she may not be the right person to strike the right tone in a particular situation. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's the factory floor worker, or it's somebody who's been with a company for many years and has a real sense of, it's the heartbeat of the business. So sometimes you have to look a little bit below the person that may be the business leader to strike the right tone and be more empathetic with your customers. I remember a particular situation. We were working with a minerals company, and the boss was a very hard-nosed businessman, and we had to announce a very difficult decision they were making. And we got the manager from the shop floor to make the announcement because he understood it from a different perspective, from somebody who's lived in that area all his life, who'd worked in the company, understood the impact it was going to have on people. He was just far more empathetic than somebody who's maybe in this particular case, a gentleman who was not British, running a British company. Having somebody from the shop floor was much more empathetic in that particular circumstance.
Yeah, I think it can be a bit jarring if your CEO has never spoken to your audience before, and then you're suddenly getting all these emails and letters from the CEO. And, as a consumer, if you've never encountered them before and you don't know them personally, I don't think that really resonates. So I think that can seem almost like an easy trick to try and think that speaking as a CEO will make your company seem more empathetic. I don't think that's necessarily the case.
Okay. And Angelica, would you then say you agree or disagree with having a blanket response prepared for a crisis? You talked earlier a little bit about personalizing it, so clearly that's a key element of it then.
Yeah, I don't think you can have a blanket response. Again, I think it's brand by brand. I think you can have a blanket process in that if there is a crisis, there's a process internally that helps you decide on your strategy. And that can be in place in kind of peacetime so that you know what happens if there is a crisis, how you manage it internally, and the cogs can start working. But the response, I think, has to be authentic and true to you, really. There's no other way to do it. I think when in doubt, focus on the well-being of others, of your consumers, of your staff. Don't try and reflect too much how this is affecting your company personally. Like, what people don't want to see right now is how badly this has affected your cash flow or something like that. They want to feel that you care more about them and about your staff as well. So focus on the well-being of others. That's why I received quite a lot of stuff that's press releases about how well certain companies are doing in this crisis. And it's true, there are certain industries that are really booming right now, like video conferencing or whatever it is. And I think if you're just sending out a press release kind of talking about your increase in sales or how much stuff has gone up for you, that doesn't actually look that great. So I would stay away from those kind of news stories and focus more on the well-being of others and how your company is doing good, really.
Okay, excellent. Go ahead, Phil.
So I was going to say, I think you make a very good point there that you can certainly set up a blanket process where you identify who's going to be leading in a crisis, what the potential weaknesses are in the business, but you can't provide a blanket response. In my experience, I often get strategies. Maybe I'm working with another agency who's got another side of the particular client we're working with. I often see strategies trying to address every possible crisis that will come along, and none of them ever fit the bill because every crisis is unexpected and individual. And I do think that these days journalists, in my experience, they understand you can't give them a response in 20 minutes. You need to buy a little bit of time and consider your response and make sure you get it right. But I don't think a blanket response works at all, no. I still think one of the most important things is to put a perspective on the crisis, because often customers that we're working with are in meltdown when a crisis hits them, and sometimes you've got to put a perspective on it, which is what Boris and Trump are trying to do at the moment. It's why they keep saying 3 months, 12 weeks, trying to put a perspective to give people some sort of, as I say, light at the end of the tunnel, so that they don't think this is the end of the world.
Okay, and Phil, what sort of strategies would you then recommend to come up with the right messaging during a crisis, or even as a reputation building exercise?
I think the most important thing is empathy with your customers. So you need to really understand what they're going through and where their issues are. I think first and foremost, I don't, as I said before, I don't think you should talk about survival ever in any situation. You talk about the positives in the situation, that you're adjusting your brand, you're changing the focus in the business, whatever that may be. Just keeping things very, very positive, because I just don't see negativity as any use whatsoever. And I think you've got to be prepared to, face the truth. Transparency is important. And I mean, sometimes you don't want to tell people everything. The business is collapsing for whatever reason, but, being as transparent as you can possibly be. And certainly I think the most important thing when you're advising people facing a crisis is that they take their staff with them. Very often we get called in and we find that companies have not been communicating with their staff. You've got a little, board at the top of it who know everything that's going on. Below that, nobody knows anything, and they've kept them all in the dark. So it becomes a real shock when suddenly they find that they're facing a crisis. So I think trying to take people with you, trusting them, bringing them along on the journey, because you're working with grown-ups. They can help fight these issues that you're facing. So really taking people with you is very, very important. But keeping positive and keeping leadership is about taking some of the pain yourself. You don't have to pass on all the pain, but I think you've got to take some of it. But invite your staff to help you and be honest with them. That's what we always say to people. And very often we say, it may sound a crazy bit of advice, but we say, why don't we just do the right thing? Because people are so busy trying to think of excuses and spinning and, reasons why we shouldn't do this. What is the right thing to do? And people know what the right thing is to do. Your gut instinct tells you that. And I think, sometimes people say, well, that's simple. What are we paying you for? And I just say, well, bringing a perspective to things and just getting you to do the right thing.
I like that, getting you to do the right thing. Very, very good point there. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Angelica, as well. We've actually had a number of questions in. It's been very, very busy coming in with the questions, so thank you to the audience for those. We're going to jump straight in, actually. Let me quickly take a look. All right. First one for Phil. So you say that PR agencies are at risk, but aren't they integral to internal comms at this time? And how do you think they can convince clients to switch tact from external comms? Excuse me, my screen just flicked. How do you think they can convince clients to switch tact from external comms if they've been affected?
I think the conversation with clients is really, you've really got to build very close relationships with them by being very proactive. Very often agencies will wait for a client to ring with an issue or a problem. You've got to speak to them every day, ring them, console them if necessary, but really get under the skin of the client. They really need to know that you care, because if they think you're there just taking the money and being paid to be in the distance, you'll lose them very quickly. So we're very proactively contacting our clients every day and making sure we're there for them. We're prepared to be completely adaptive as well. So sometimes it's us talking to their staff where, they're busy putting a fire out. We'll go and speak to their staff or get a call online and explain some of the issues to them. You just got to be really, really close to them, I think. But trying to persuade them, we don't push too hard. We say, we're here for you. We give them good advice, and generally they stay with us for that reason. And if they've got financial problems, they say, try and find a solution to it. Don't just say, okay, thanks very much, goodbye. I mean, we can take a payment holiday. We can start again in 3 months' time. We can do a different type of PR for you at the moment, more crisis than maybe the promoting stuff that we've been doing. Just being adaptive, I think.
Yeah, excellent. And obviously we have April Fool's Day coming up tomorrow. Angelica, would you say that PRs should avoid April Fool's Day and really sort of avoid campaigns in this kind of climate at the moment?
I think this whole year has been April Fool's Day, so I don't think there's much. Yeah, I would say April Fool's Day is cancelled. From my personal perspective, I don't think pitching anything around it right now is. We just want positive, good stuff. I don't know if it will land. We'll see, but I probably would stay away from it personally.
Okay. And next question, Phil, you mentioned issues with cash flow for businesses earlier. When would you say is a good time then to start talking business as normal without really looking insensitive?
I think it's really hard to say. I think we've got to be careful, and for the immediate future, it's going to be at least 3 or 4 months, I think, before we come out of this, and then maybe we can start talking about more positive things again. But I think cash flow is an issue. I think, as Angelica said earlier, is not something that really appeals to your audience, and it certainly doesn't appeal to your own staff. You've just got to. That's part of being running a business. But I think talking about pound, shillings and pence at the moment, it's just not appropriate. It's like, Coca-Cola cancelled all their marketing, didn't they? I think it was last week, and people were saying, crazy things to do. Well, I totally understand it. They're an upbeat, brand aimed at young people, all about the joys of spring. I think to suddenly turn your whole message into something else for them was very, very difficult. I mean, they may come back again in the near future with more of a social conscience campaign, but I think people have got to be very careful that it's appropriate for the times.
Yeah. Okay. Angelica, I've got one for you here. Would you rather receive full press releases or pitches at this time? So we have a member in the audience saying they've seen a better response from pitches and features, but they're not really sure press releases and campaigns are as successful at the moment. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I think that at the moment, the more personalised, the better when it comes to sending stuff to journalists. We're actually receiving less, so actually we're paying more attention to the stuff we are receiving, but it needs to be a higher quality and it needs to feel personalised. Isn't the time to be sending out press releases, I don't think, on kind of general topics. I would try and personalise the pitch to the publication where possible, unless there's something kind of really landmark that your business is doing, perhaps in with social good or something kind of social change, then that might be the place for a press release, but I would try and personalise it.
Okay. And how would you then say, how can we make sure that pitches stand out more?
There's a couple of things that I think journalists are really looking for at the moment. We spoke earlier about the media landscape changing. I think one of the big things that's shifting at the moment is concerns around fake news and putting out stories that don't feel backed up scientifically. So I think when you want to pitch something, if you can back up your pitch as much as possible with some level of expertise, whether that's stats or insights that your company has researched, or if you can kind of employ an expert to come on board as an ambassador for your brand and provide some kind of unique voice. We're really looking for stuff that has expertise to back it up, especially on like well-being things. We're getting pitched so many well-being stories that you want someone that's got some level of authenticity about them when it comes to pitching. So that'd be one thing I'd say, expert voice, and then anything that feels like it's got a good level of humanity. So a really interesting interview or profiling a person that's doing something stand out at the moment. I think the people side of stuff is also where journalists are looking. We're trying to create stories that are positive and inspire our audience, and people stories will land well with us.
Okay. And I'm sure there's quite a lot landing in your inbox at the moment. What sort of PR pitch subject lines would you say are catching your attention at this time as a journalist?
Well, I think a lot of it is catching your attention for the wrong reasons, to be honest. I think anything that is interesting that our audience can do virtually, that is genuinely something they would want to do. I'm seeing quite a lot of kind of shoehorning into the virtual event space. And I would just say take a pause, slow down and try and work out whether the thing that you're trying to make virtual is things that people would actually want to do. So I can see quite a lot of brands trying to create something digitally that isn't perhaps the most exciting offering. So if you're going to try and do something, make sure that the thing itself is something you would want to do as a consumer. I think one way that you can also stand out and do things differently is media titles and publications are looking for ways in which they can work with brands on their social media channels. So whether that's hosting an Instagram live or doing a webinar or doing a workout class, we're looking for ways to provide interesting content through our social channels with our audience. So that might be something you can do as a brand. If you're not able to operate right now, that could be just getting, the sommelier from your hotel and doing a live Q&A with a publication. So try and think of ways that you could work that aren't just content, aren't just editorial, basically.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Phil, you talked a little bit earlier about how quickly the media landscape is changing at the moment. Are there any new COVID-19 trends that you've noticed just this week, for example?
I don't think so. I think, as I say, I think we'll see the media change in the coming weeks to be more positive and looking for, some way of keeping people going, because certainly at the moment you pick up the newspapers, as I said, and it's either old news or it's depressing news. So I think they've got to come up with something that's giving us, some way forward. That's talking about national newspapers. Sites like Angelica does, I think are going to be very successful because it gives people a chance to just park what's going on in the background, put it in the background for a while, because we can't all live with just headline, which is more and more depressing. So I do think we're starting to see people looking, certainly I can see in the Times and the Mail, they're looking for something positive now every day, trying to find a new stat or a new expert, somebody who will say, look, this is, things are turning and this is what will happen very quickly. Financially, it's very difficult. You watch financial experts, for instance, on Sky and BBC making predictions and they contradict each other every day. So it's very hard to at the moment, to navigate our way out of this. And I don't see any particular change in trend. No, we're too early in the crisis to see that.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier, obviously, negative news. How would you communicate negative news to employees in the most positive way?
I think you've just got to be open with people. The people are realistic. They understand. We're reading in the papers that many staff are taking pay cuts, and it's a terrible thing to happen, or taking unpaid holidays. But you've got to be honest with people and share some of the maybe the minute details of your business with them. And my experience, when you do that, people are remarkably understanding. They understand that they're not alone in this. That those companies have all got problems. Many companies have got problems. And if you share it with them in a transparent and open way, they will stick with you, because you want your staff to be behind you when this thing's over.
Yeah, absolutely. Angelica, we've seen a few brands sort of launch hashtag campaigns. For example, Nike, they've just launched a Play at Home campaign. What do you think about this? Do you think this is something that brands should engage in?
Yeah, I don't think there's a yes or no answer to that. Again, I think it comes down to what your brand is offering. I think if you are creating something that makes people's lives better in some way, then sure, go ahead, create a social media campaign, try and speak up as loud as you can, especially if it's something positive like workouts or well-being or mental health. It's a great time. People are spending a lot of time on social media, so much more than they were before. So actually you have a pretty engaged audience there who are waiting for things to get on board with. So as long as it's positive and it has some level of social action, I think there's no harm in it whatsoever. I wouldn't do it if you're just trying to promote your brand or increase your sales.
Okay. And just sort of coming back to budgets again, I think this is obviously a key concern really for everyone at the moment. Phil, coming to you with this one, what would you say about clients that the CFO has put a hold on? So would you, for example, help them for free? Is there anything that could be done?
I don't think so. I think it's very difficult to start helping people for free. I mean, obviously, you've built a long-lasting relationship with clients. You're much more a PR anyway. You tend to become a friend and a confidant, and of course, on a friendly basis, you would help people. But clearly, there's no future for a business if you're running the whole thing for free. No, we give people guidance and help in every way we can. It just depends on the different situation. You've just got to be prepared to adapt to what that situation is.
Mm-hmm. And would you say that a product launch is still possible at this time?
No,
or would you really advise against launching anything at the moment?
No, I would advise against launching anything for the moment. I think it's very difficult. I mean, clearly, if it's a hygiene product or something that's very relevant to coronavirus, then yes. But I think very, very difficult to launch at the moment. I mean,
I don't know. I would say if it was something that was like a digital product, though, it would be okay. Because I actually think people have a lot of time on their hands and are quite willing to spend on like personal development and stuff like that at the moment. So I think it depends on the offering. If it was, I think there is some space for product launches at the moment.
That's a fair point. I mean, just to contradict myself, actually, I mean, the other thing is there are many fashion brands out there at the moment who have ordered, spring and summer fashion ranges and are not going to be able to sell them. So clearly, many of those will have to get on the front foot and try and sell them online and try and launch it, such as whether that's a sale or whether it's just a gifting. I don't know, but there are whole brands out there that have got stock that it's just going to be out of time when we get back to normal. So certainly, I just think you've got to be very careful and subtle. If it's a big money maker, I wouldn't do anything, financial or holidays at the moment. I'm not sure I would be promoting those. I would wait a few months. So I think it depends on the product.
Yeah. But if you look at what happened with ASOS yesterday, I don't think fashion brands either promoting that they've got stock is a good idea, because there's concerns about the welfare of their employees in the warehouses. So I don't know for fashion what's going to happen.
Obviously, none of us know what's going to happen and how long this is going to take. But would you be able to say when it would be acceptable again for a company to start pushing sales of their products again, if they don't do it at the moment? Because obviously, for many companies that are in this position, they need to put their products out there. They need to generate sales. Do we just need to sort of go with the flow and see how things develop over the coming weeks and months?
I think so. I think you've got to react to the mood of the nation. And at the moment, when people are losing jobs and being paid less, I think that, trying to get people to spend money is going to be very difficult because people are going to be pulling in their sides and just being very careful. And I think that's one of the great worries when things do get back to normal. Will people spend money and get the economy going again, or will they remain very safety conscious and wary? And that's going to be the big problem, and I guess the challenge for PRs really is to try and get people excited and want to spend money, because if they don't, then we're all in big trouble. So it's just about timing the mood. When the mood's right, it'll be obvious, I think, and that could come quicker than we think. If we're close to the height of this crisis in the next week or two, then certainly 4 to 6 weeks down the line, things might change. But I mean, that depends on what the scientists tell us, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Angelica, there have been a few brands that are actually being quite reserved during this crisis. They're being quieter. They're opting to serve their employees and clients rather than being proactive with the press. What do you think about that? And what sort of reactions have there been to this?
I don't think everyone needs to have a voice right now. I actually quite respect brands that want to stay a bit quiet. I don't think there's any problem with that. There's so much noise going on that actually sometimes just saying less and we're waiting it out is fine. I don't think you need to necessarily use the pandemic as a news hook to try and get coverage. There's a time and a place for coverage, and it might be that genuinely the thing that you're promoting just doesn't fit right now with what's going on, if it's a holiday provider or if it's a hotel chain. And that's okay. Staying quiet is fine, unless you have some kind of positive news to share around it. That's all right. I think I would say, back to the sales point, I don't think there's that much harm if you can do it sensitively to be promoting your product right now. If it's something like home workout equipment, a well-being platform, if you're a yoga teacher, like, these things are still in demand. So there are specific sectors that actually people really want to buy things from right now. Or if you're a new food product, and you sell online, or a food delivery company, there's quite a lot that people are still buying. And I know people feel pretty disheartened, but I have a lot of friends who haven't lost their jobs, luckily, and are at home and are saving a lot of money because they're not going out, and actually they're spending quite a lot of time online and want to buy stuff and want to help small businesses. So not everyone won't be spending. So I think if you're a small business and you're worrying, I would just say some people will be spending money. So do it sensitively, but you can still try and do sales.
Okay, excellent. We've had quite a few questions in about on charities. Phil, let me come to you for this one. Do you think charities should still be using the media for campaigning at the moment, or just for opinion pieces and case study stories that are aimed at reassuring and informing the people they represent?
I think it's very difficult. I wouldn't advise them spending money on an advertising campaign, for instance. But yes, I would still be out there pushing and keeping their brand awareness up, because I think that's important. Charities often, the successful charities tend to do well because they have a long-term plan, a long-term strategy. And I think absolutely it's important, but it's very difficult for them because at the moment, do you want to be in a national newspaper or magazine alongside all the sort of grim news that's going on at the moment? Unless you're a charity that's specifically somehow connected with coronavirus, I would be very careful. But I still think case histories, good stories, positive stories, human interest, inspiring stories are very relevant, particularly now, in fact.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And we talked a little bit earlier about how the way we're working is changing. I think probably this webinar we would have all been in the same room. Now we're all dialing in from our homes, and this is obviously the case for PRs as well. They're unable to do face-to-face meetings to discuss clients and opportunities with journalists. Angelica, would you, as a journalist, say you'd be interested in virtual meetings?
Probably not, if I'm being totally honest. I think that there's no, sorry if that's a bit harsh. I'm not convinced that there would be enough client needs to go over that's relevant to right now. The way I see it is my friends who work in agencies, they've got a couple of things that fit with what's going on, and then some of them are just staying kind of quiet. I wouldn't be convinced that everyone would have enough to flesh out a meeting with. That would be my 2 cents. In the same way, people have asked me quite a lot about phone calls right now, and I would say that everyone's anxious enough. Our phones going off is not needed, and I would just do everything on email, and I would leave the lead times to follow up and chase longer than you would normally as well, because people are being a bit slower to get back to other people. So I don't think so at the moment. I would just do standard email pitching, unless the journalists express a desire to do video conferencing. I don't think so.
Okay. Phil, next question is for you. What's your opinion on dealing with the backlash on Twitter from furloughed workers or people who may be impacted financially because of a brand's decision due to coronavirus?
It's very difficult. I think clearly that there's been an issue with their employer not explaining the problems they're having properly and being transparent. And I can understand why people would be upset and angry about it. I'm not sure expressing their views on Twitter is going to benefit anybody, but in particular, I guess it might damage the brand further. Maybe that brand deserves it if they have behaved particularly badly. But Twitter for me, it can be very damaging. It can also be very helpful in a particular news cycle. But I always think of. I would say to people, just think about how this is going to look down the line when you next go for a job interview, or you're in another situation and somebody can somehow find your tweet. Then you just got to be very careful, I think. But the companies have got to behave properly, and they've got to understand that staff have to have proper information, have the issue explained to them, and then they will understand. And of course you're going to have people still upset in the circumstances, but at least you've been transparent and honest with them. That's the key, I think.
Yeah. Okay. And a question here is slightly off, which is actually to both of you. Are there any books, resources that you would suggest that furloughed communications or PR employees would read right now?
Ooh. What about being furloughed, or about anything?
Probably about anything, just furloughed as in they have more time available now. Any sort of good PR books.
There's a good book called PR School by Natalie Trice. I recommend that. It's a PR book.
Say again the name, by Natalie Trice. What was the name?
Yeah, it's called PR School.
PR School, okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's also just general... Go ahead. Sorry,
carry on.
Just for general non-fiction interest, a great book by Kate Murphy called You're Not Listening. It's about the importance of listening and how none of us know how to listen anymore. And I recommend it. It's good for all parts of life.
And the book I recommend always is Everything They Didn't Teach You at Harvard by McCormack, the guy who founded, one of the biggest agencies in the world. I'm sorry, the name's gone from me, but wonderful book, very short, sharp piece of advice all the way through it. It's a fantastic book. Excellent.
Thank you for those. Got a question on fundraising. Phil, let me put that to you. So fundraising is a concern. Obviously, we're coming back to charities here with many events that charities rely on being cancelled at the moment. Would you have any advice on fundraising effectively during this time?
I think it's very difficult. I think people are, feeling the pinch, and it's a hard time to be doing it. But it's a short time. We're going to be out of this in a few weeks' time, and that's the time to come back. To have everything ready for the comeback, I think it would be my advice, not to waste an awful lot of effort now. I still think, as we said just now, keep the profile up, work on the human interest stuff that Angelica was talking about. Very important to keep that sort of, people having that empathy with you, but wait for the comeback and be ready then, I think. That would be my view. I just don't think at the moment you could be wasting an awful lot of time and money if you're trying to launch financial appeals at this time, really, because people are very much focused on home and their own problems.
Yeah. And we talked a little bit earlier about sort of spreading positive news. In terms of positive press then, and companies addressing positive things they're doing around COVID-19, Angelica, how careful would you say the public should be, and in terms of being on high alert for businesses taking advantage of the markets?
There is, I think, increased scrutiny from both journalists and the general public over what businesses are doing now. And I think that we'll remember long after the crisis is over how businesses behaved. And I know that lots of publications are running things like good and bad lists of what companies are doing. So there is a real awareness about it. Sorry, can you just repeat the second half of your question?
Yeah, so just in terms of companies taking advantage, really, and the public being on high alert to read between the lines of potential positive messaging there that actually has a hidden agenda, really.
Well, I don't know. I think that I wouldn't say we're being particularly careful. I personally, as a consumer, when I read a positive news story, I don't look at what the underlying messages might be. So I wouldn't worry too much. I mean, if you're trying to put a spin on something that isn't genuinely positive, then that is obviously problematic. But again, keep it authentic and true to you, and there shouldn't be a problem, really.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I think in the last few weeks, we've really seen that the new media stars or the influencers are doctors. Is there something where, maybe Phil, I'll put this one to you. Do you see a rising content strategy in the healthcare space? And is this something, what sort of demand do you see for health-related stories and interest? Is this something that we're likely going to see even in the coming few months, a trend that could perhaps be durable?
I think so. I think we're going to see individuals become, particularly well known because of the crisis. Many of them are on television every day. Some of them are very good. Some are not so good. So I think the good ones, profiles and brands, will grow. And I think there's an opportunity for some individuals there for sure. But we've got a number of health brands, and all of them are very occupied with current stuff and working around the crisis and working with with professionals in the crisis space. So I do think healthcare is going to become a particular focus. People are also going to be, after this is over, going to be much more careful about their health and about making sure, that they're robust as they can be, eating better, taking the right supplements. All that sort of stuff is going to be very important, I think. And, people will be very aware of a repeat of this situation. So I think there's certainly communications from health companies, health products will rise in the coming months for sure.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And we talked a little bit earlier about different responses, about some companies being a little bit more reserved. Angelica, are there any brands that you would call out as having really done a brilliant job at communicating, and perhaps some that have failed?
Yeah, a couple of them that I think have done really well. Leon would be one of the ones that I would say. Mm-hmm. Leon has been doing amazing things with their shops, turning them into grocery stores, delivering food to the NHS. I think what they've done really nicely with their campaign is that they've shared and been very transparent on Twitter throughout about the challenges they face doing it, how much hard work's gone into it, the meetings they've had, and provided their audience an insight into the inner workings of the business that they wouldn't normally get. So I think, they've been tweeting from their CEO, which I think has been a really nice touch and people have connected with. So Leon would be one that I think have handled things really well. I know in recent days, Airbnb has announced that they're allowing people to give Airbnbs to NHS staff, and I think that will be an interesting one to see how it develops. I think that brands now, there was an opportunity perhaps in the last week for any brands that had really quickly got on using their company for social good were getting a lot of coverage. Just Park was another one that was getting a lot of coverage for using the Just Park app to help NHS workers find parking spaces near hospitals. But now I think brands have caught on to the fact that positive news is one way to try and gain coverage. So being cynical, at the beginning of the week, I was getting maybe one email a day from a brand saying, could you write about my positive news story? And now I'm getting maybe 10 or 15 a day. So it's becoming saturated already in that space. So what I'm looking for as a journalist is like volume and numbers, like how many people are they reaching? How much money have they raised? Where, without just saying, we're now offering 1p of every sale to to Age UK. Like, I'm looking for quite big numbers now, because it does seem like this is a trend that's emerging, which is not cool. We don't want it to be a trend. We want it to be real.
Yeah, excellent. Phil, anything to add to that? Any brands that you've seen that communicated really well or not so well in this time?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen one or two of the healthcare companies, HCA, one of the big private hospitals, I think, how they've really sort of come down and, been prepared to get off their pedestal and really help the National Health Service and align themselves to it. So I think we're seeing, a real effort really from, and also I just think the health service themselves, I know this is stating the obvious, but the way they behaved and this humility and the reasonableness of, the people involved. I mean, it's astonishing, really. And I think the other, the way that the British public are pulled together is a wonderful thing for all of us to see. And I think it's been more efficient and more dynamic than we ever could have hoped for. But I know that's not a particular companies, but I just think really at the moment overriding over all the companies are the public servants who are just doing an amazing job.
Excellent, thank you. We've got a few questions here around events that are taking place either in the summer or towards the end of the year. Is there any point in marketing these now?
No.
Very difficult. We represent a large number of big sporting organisations, and no, not at the moment, because they've no idea of knowing what date these will be on. So very, very difficult to do. I think even promising that the events will happen. We look after Premier League football clubs, for instance, and they don't know what the future holds for them. So no, very, very difficult indeed. Anybody with events, as part of their business is stuck at the moment. Very difficult.
Yeah. Okay. I'm afraid this is all that we have time for with the Q&A. Thank you, everybody, for sending in your questions, and thank you to Phil and Angelica for answering them. Just very quickly, before we end this webinar, I wanted to share the Cision COVID-19 resources link. What you'll see here is this is online, and this page provides several tools to support your comms during this pandemic. You'll see a coronavirus monitor, which is a daily product that you can subscribe to, gives you insights around the global coverage that you see. There's a weekly analytics report as well. We have a media dashboard and a crisis comms toolkit and a bunch of other things. Do take a look. The link is just on the screen there. And also very quickly, just before we go, I wanted to mention the next Cision webinar that's coming up on April 9th. Following its brilliant CommsCon session, Stuart White from Thames Water is back to share the story and results of the successful media campaign that surrounded the Whitechapel Fatberg. This is a really good one, so do tune in if you can, April the 9th. And this is also a little bit about how you can turn a negative story around. So all that really remains for me to say is thank you to our audience, thank you to our panel, thanks for sending you through your questions. I hope that you can take away some learnings that you can apply to your comms moving forward. Thank you for being with us today, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Stay safe, goodbye, all the best.